Even though he was the adopted son, he never left me. An elderly mother, on her deathbed, revealed a truth that changed the lives of her biological children. A month after the funeral, the autumn wind blew gently, carrying golden leaves that gathered in the backyard of Mrs. Olivia's modest home. The cold October air seeped through the cracks in the windows, filling the house with a sense of nostalgia that felt as heavy as the silence enveloping it. Inside, life was slowly fading away. Olivia, lying on a bed that seemed larger than usual, stared at the ceiling with tired but clear eyes. She knew her time was running out. The house that once echoed with children's laughter and lively conversations was now almost empty. Only Gabriel, her adopted son, walked the hallways, his presence discreet yet constant. There were moments when Olivia felt that the sound of his footsteps was what kept her connected to this world. Each day, those soft steps accompanied her, breaking the monotony of her solitude. Gabriel entered the room, holding a steaming cup of tea between his hands. It was the same herbal tea he had prepared for her every morning since her illness had confined her to bed. Gabriel's face reflected fatigue, but also an unwavering devotion. Despite not being her biological child, he had been by her side through every moment since the illness began to take its toll on her body. "Here you go, Mom," he said softly, as he brought the cup closer. The word Mom always resonated in Olivia's heart like a caress, but it also felt like a wound. Gabriel had called her that for as long as he could remember, since the moment she welcomed him into her home. Though he did not share her blood, he had loved and cared for her as if he did. In his eyes, Olivia saw an unconditional love that, in her final moments, felt like a balm for her soul. Yet, in that same love, was a reminder of all she had lost with her biological children. Olivia took a sip of tea, her trembling hands barely holding the cup. Her eyes, grey like the autumn sky, misted over as she recalled the days when her home was filled with life. Anna, her eldest daughter, always so bright and ambitious, running through the garden with her books under her arm, ready to conquer the world. Where was Anna now? In the big city, immersed in her career. It was hard for Olivia to remember the last time she had seen her. Calls were becoming more infrequent, and when they came, they were always accompanied by an excuse. "I'm busy, Mom. I have to get back to work." Robert, her second child, was also absent. As a child, Robert always had a smile on his face. He was the family clown, the one who could always elicit laughter from everyone. But the years had not been kind to him. Debts and failures had turned that smile into a constant grimace of worry. His visits to the house were brief and filled with unease, as if spending time with his mother was just another task to check off his list. And Luis, the youngest, the adventurer, had disappeared long ago, at least emotionally. He had left the country to explore the world, promising to return with exciting stories. At first, letters and calls were frequent, but now he only appeared on special occasions, and even those visits felt like encounters with a stranger. Olivia felt a tear escape her eye and roll down her wrinkled cheek. When did everything change, she thought? How did I end up here, alone, surrounded by ghosts of memories, waiting for death? "Mom?" Gabriel's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Are you okay?" She looked at him. Her lips trembled, but not from the cold. The pain of loneliness grew sharper with each passing second. But how could she explain to Gabriel what she felt? How could he, who had been the only constant in her life, understand the void left by the children she had raised with so much effort and sacrifice, who now seemed to have forgotten her? "I'm fine, son," she finally said, forcing a smile. "I was just remembering other times." Gabriel nodded, as if he understood more than she was saying. He had always been that way. Even as a child, Gabriel was intuitive, picking up on emotions that others overlooked. It was one of the reasons Olivia always felt a special connection with him, even though blood ties did not bind them. And now, as the end of her life drew near, That connection seemed to be the only thing keeping her going. Olivia looked out the window. Outside, the leaves continued to fall, blown by the wind. Each one seemed a reflection of her own life, gradually fading away, carried by the unstoppable current of time. She knew she didn't have much time left. The doctor had been clear, weeks, maybe a month. But what troubled her most wasn't the physical pain, but the certainty that her biological children wouldn't be there when she departed. Only Gabriel. He had never abandoned her. A pang of pain shot through her chest, and not from the illness. It was the weight of a secret she had kept for so long, the secret of Gabriel's true identity. Time was running out, and soon she would have to face that truth. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill her weakened lungs. "Gabriel." Her voice trembled as she called him. "Yes, Mom," he responded, moving closer with a concerned look. Olivia gazed at him deeply, as if wanting to etch his face into her memory before it was too late. She knew the moment had come to tell him the truth, but fear consumed her. How would he take it? Would it change what he felt for her? "There's something I need to tell you. Something I can't take to the grave," she whispered, closing her eyes for a moment as tears began to flow more freely. Gabriel frowned, leaning in closer. "What do you mean, Mom? What is it?" Silence filled the room, and the sound of falling leaves outside felt louder than ever. Olivia opened her eyes, determined, even though fear still gripped her heart. You were not abandoned. We didn't adopt you because you had no one." Olivia's voice broke, and Gabriel looked at her, confused. "What are you saying?" he asked, struggling to comprehend. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to find the strength to continue. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sheet. You are my son. My blood son." The silence that followed was deafening. Gabriel stared at her, unable to process the words he had just heard. Everything he thought he knew about his life had collapsed in an instant. Olivia closed her eyes, exhausted. She knew the conversation had only just begun, but she also knew there was no turning back now. The crackling of the wood in the fireplace was the only sound breaking the silence in Mrs. Olivia's home. Still recovering from the impact of the confession she had just made to Gabriel, her mind began to drift towards the memories she had kept like old jewels locked away in a chest. Images of happier times enveloped her, and in the dim light of the room, her heart traveled back to the past. In those days, the house was always full of life, with children's laughter, hurried footsteps, and the constant coming and going of her 3 biological children, Anna, Robert, and Luis. Anna had always been her pride. From a very young age, she displayed a brilliant intelligence and an insatiable curiosity that seemed boundless. Olivia remembered how Anna devoured books with a fervor that nearly frightened her teachers. As she grew older, her ambition became more evident. She was the first in the family to attend university, an achievement Olivia celebrated with tears of joy. Watching her eldest daughter graduate with honors was one of the proudest moments of her life. However, over time, the shine of that pride began to fade. Anna had changed. Her life in the big city, her professional successes, everything had slowly distanced her from the family. Olivia recalled painfully the phone calls that became shorter and more infrequent. "I'm busy, Mom. I can't come this weekend. We'll talk later." Those words, spoken coldly, echoed over and over until the connection turned into a mere formality. The last time Anna visited the house, over a year ago, it was only for one night. She barely looked around, and when Olivia tried to talk to her about how she felt, Anna simply diverted the conversation back to work. Always so busy, always so distant. In those moments, Olivia wondered if the Anna she knew as a child still existed somewhere within that successful, cold woman. Olivia closed her eyes, suppressing a tear. The pain of the distance with Anna was something she had learned to endure, but she never fully accepted it. Her daughter, once her greatest pride, was now a stranger. Then there was Robert, her second son. As a child, Robert was the family's ray of sunshine, always smiling, always joking, filling the house with joy. Olivia could hear his laughter in her mind, a laughter that now felt distant, like the echo of a life long gone. But adulthood had been harsh on Robert. The dreams he once had crumbled as responsibilities and financial difficulties piled up. He had failed in several businesses, and though he tried to maintain a facade of success, Olivia always saw the truth in his eyes. He was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Debts weighed heavily on him, and his visits to the house were marked by a mix of shame and need. Robert was no longer the cheerful boy she remembered. Now, when he came to see her, he always seemed in a hurry to leave. His mother knew that the conversations they shared were just a way to soothe his own conscience, a means to keep up appearances. But behind those brief moments of feigned affection, she felt his desperation for answers that could fix his life. Questions about money, financial advice, or how to pay off his debts occupied his mind. And when Olivia couldn't offer him any solutions, Robert's frustration became evident. Still, Olivia couldn't blame him. She knew that Robert had lost more than just money along the way. He had lost part of himself, that spark of life that once defined him. Now, he was a shadow of what he used to be, and that was something Olivia mourned deeply. And then there was Luis, little Luis, the adventurer. Since he could remember, Luis had dreamed of exploring the world. As a child, he always ran toward the horizon, as if searching for something beyond what he could see. When he turned 20, Olivia wasn't surprised when he told her he wanted to go abroad to seek his own destiny. At first, Luis's letters arrived frequently. He described his travels, the people he met, the cultures he explored. Every word he wrote was filled with life and enthusiasm, and Olivia felt proud of his bravery. But as the years passed, the letters came less often, the calls became sporadic, and Luis, her youngest son, was becoming a stranger. The last times he returned, Olivia barely recognized him. It was as if time and distance had erased part of him, as if her son was no longer the same one who left with so many dreams. Now, Luis only returned for special occasions, and there was always an excuse for not staying long. The distance, he would say. But Olivia knew that the true distance wasn't the one separating continents. It was the one that had grown in their hearts. Olivia sighed. Her biological children, whom she had loved with all her being, had slowly drifted away, as if each had taken a path leading them further from her. And yet, amid that growing distance, there was Gabriel. Gabriel, the son who had come into her life when she needed him most, like a small light in the darkness. Olivia had adopted him after a personal tragedy, one that had broken her heart, but also made her stronger. From the moment she held him in her arms, she knew Gabriel was her son, even if he didn't share her blood. Her memories of Gabriel were different. He had always been near, always willing to help, listen, and care for her. When Olivia began to fall ill, Gabriel was the only one who didn't pull away. Instead, he moved in with her, setting aside his own life to be her caregiver, her companion, her support. Olivia had always felt a special connection with him, something she couldn't explain. Now, she understood the reason. Gabriel was her blood son, the child born from a forbidden love that she had decided to keep hidden. But despite that deep bond, Olivia always knew that her biological children never saw Gabriel as one of their own. To them, he was always the adopted one. Though they never voiced it aloud, Olivia sensed the silent disdain, the emotional distance her children maintained with him. Even as children, there was an invisible barrier between them and Gabriel, as if blood separated them instead of uniting them. Now, in her final days, that silent disdain had grown. Anna, Robert, and Luis barely acknowledged Gabriel's existence, despite him being the one by their mother's side, caring for her with a devotion they never showed. Olivia knew that to them, Gabriel would never truly be their brother. As these thoughts swirled in her mind, Olivia felt a knot in her chest, not from her illness, but from the emotional pain consuming her. She had sacrificed so much for her biological children, but in her final moments, only Gabriel was there. And now, with the weight of the secret she had kept for so long, Olivia wondered if she would ever see her other children again before she passed. Her fingers brushed the sheets, and a sigh escaped her lips. Outside, the wind continued to carry away the fallen leaves, taking them to uncertain destinations, just like her children, who had been swept away by life to places they might never return from. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to drift into the memories of those happier days. But when she opened them again, the emptiness of the room reminded her of the reality she was living. She was alone, or almost alone. Gabriel was there, as always. Perhaps, Olivia thought, the true child was not the one who bore your blood, but the one who never abandoned you. The clock on the wall struck 3 in the morning. The house, shrouded in the darkness of night, barely whispered with the occasional creak of the old wood. Gabriel, seated in a chair next to Mrs. Olivia's bed, listened to the sound of her breathing, which grew heavier and more labored. He knew his mother's days were numbered, but what he couldn't imagine was that, in that quiet dawn, his life was about to change forever. Mrs. Olivia was restless. From the bed, she could see Gabriel's silhouette against the light, his sturdy and still youthful figure leaning slightly forward, as if anticipating her need for assistance at any moment. He was her angel, her guardian, the only one who hadn't run away, the only one who had never abandoned her. The love she felt for him mingled with the unbearable weight of the secret she had carried throughout her life. She knew she couldn't take that truth to the grave. With effort, Olivia raised her trembling hand and extended it toward Gabriel. The young man, always alert, immediately rose and leaned toward her, taking her hand gently. "Mom," he whispered, his voice laden with concern. Olivia looked deeply into Gabriel's eyes, filled with a pain he could not fully understand. In that moment, her lips began to move, barely a whisper at first, but then, more firmly, she released the words she had held back for so many years. "Gabriel, there's something I must tell you." Her voice trembled, as if the words were thorns tearing at her throat. "I can't die without you knowing." Gabriel frowned, worried by the urgency in her tone. He sat on the edge of the bed, leaning closer, trying to grasp what Olivia was trying to say. "Don't say that, Mom. You still have time." He tried to comfort her, but deep down he knew it wasn't true. "No, son. Listen to me. There's a secret. Something I've hidden from you your entire life." Tears began to stream from Olivia's eyes, rolling down her wrinkled cheeks as she gripped Gabriel's hand tighter. You were not adopted because you were abandoned." Gabriel stared at her in complete bewilderment. The words, "you were not adopted," echoed in his mind like bells, each one louder than the last. What did she mean? Olivia had always been clear about the story of his adoption. It was the only truth he had ever known. But at that moment, something in his mother's eyes made him feel as though the ground beneath his feet was beginning to tremble. "What do you mean I wasn't adopted because I was abandoned?" he asked, his voice shaking, a mix of fear and confusion. "Mom, what are you trying to tell me?" Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to muster the courage to continue. When she opened them again, the truth she had guarded in her heart for so many years came to light, illuminating a part of her life Gabriel had never imagined. "You are my son, Gabriel. My blood son." The words, though barely a whisper, fell heavily in the air. "You were never adopted. I gave birth to you." Gabriel's world came to a halt. The walls of the room seemed to shrink as the air turned thick and suffocating. What was his mother saying? His whole life he had believed he was adopted, that his mother had taken him in when no one else wanted him. That had been his identity. And now, on a dark and silent night, All of that was being ripped away abruptly, like a poorly placed bandage. But how is that possible? Gabriel stood up from the bed, taking a few steps back, trying to process what he had just heard. You always said that I had been adopted, that I had no one. Why did you lie to me? The pain in Olivia's eyes became more evident. She knew that her revelation was shattering him, but there was no other way to tell it. I hid it from you because I didn't want you to suffer because of my past. Her voice was barely a thread of sound, each word heavy with regret. You were, the result of a love that should never have been. Your father and I, we couldn't be together. Not at that time. My reputation, my family, everything would have been destroyed if the truth came to light. That's why I made the decision to say that I adopted you. I raised you as my son because you are, but not in the way people thought. Gabriel brought his hands to his head, incredulous, trying to piece together a puzzle that made no sense to him. Questions swirled in his mind, but one predominated above the rest. Who was my father? He asked, his voice broken, knowing that this answer could change everything. Olivia looked down, her body trembling. This was the hardest part, the one she had tried to bury for decades. Your father, she began, but her voice cracked. He was a married man, Gabriel, a man with a family. We loved each other, but we couldn't be together. It was all a mistake that almost destroyed my life. But I never saw you as a mistake. You were the best thing that happened to me in the midst of all that. But when I had you, I knew I couldn't keep the truth. So I raised you as adopted, to protect you, to protect myself. The silence that followed was devastating. Gabriel felt as if the ground beneath him was crumbling, as if the world he had known his whole life was being uprooted. How could he process all of this? The woman who had raised him, who had loved him like a mother, was now revealing that she was his biological mother, and worst of all, she had lied to him for years. So, everything I believed, everything I was a lie. Gabriel couldn't help the words from spilling out, laden with pain. He felt betrayed by the person he loved most. No, son, it wasn't a lie. Olivia struggled to sit up, though her body barely had the strength. I loved you with all my heart, always. It doesn't matter how you came to me. My love for you was never a lie. But I did what I thought was best at that moment. I was a young, scared woman, and the world was not kind to women like me. Gabriel felt his legs could no longer support him, and he collapsed back into the chair, his head in his hands. His mind was still processing everything he had heard. On one hand, he wanted to scream. He wanted to be angry at Olivia for hiding something so significant. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the love he had always felt from her, the love that had been real, regardless of the truth now coming to light. After several long minutes of silence, Gabriel lifted his head and looked at Olivia. She watched him with tear-filled eyes, but also with hope. Hope that perhaps he could forgive her. I don't know what to do with all of this, Mom, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to process it. Olivia nodded slowly. You don't have to do it now, son. I just wanted you to know before it's too late. I wanted you to know the truth because you have always been and will always be my son. My only son. Her voice faded to a whisper as a new wave of tears filled her eyes. Gabriel said nothing more. He simply took Olivia's hand again, gripping it tightly as the weight of that revelation fell upon him like a storm. The secret had come to light, but the consequences were just beginning to become visible. The silence of the night enveloped the house once more, and though no more words were spoken, in that stillness, both knew that everything had changed forever. The first rays of sunlight timidly filtered through the curtains of the modest room, but the dawn brought no relief to the heavy atmosphere in Mrs. Olivia's home. Gabriel had not slept a wink all night, trying to assimilate the devastating revelation his mother had confessed to him. How could he process something so deep, so transformative? He had lived his entire life believing he was someone he really wasn't. Adopted. That word, which once described who he was, now felt like a sham. His true origin had been hidden by his mother for decades, and now, as death hovered around her, everything was coming to light. He got up from the chair, stretching his stiff muscles, and decided to head to the kitchen. He needed some coffee, even though he knew it wouldn't alleviate the chaos in his mind. But as soon as he crossed the threshold of the hallway, he heard a sound that stopped him in his tracks. The soft creak of the front door. Someone had entered. Gabriel squinted, confused. Rarely did anyone visit his mother, especially unannounced. He walked toward the entrance, his footsteps echoing in the morning silence of the house, until he saw who was there. Anna and Robert. Anna, Robert, Gabriel murmured, visibly surprised. Anna was impeccably dressed, as if her elegant outfit were armor protecting her from the emotional discomfort of being there. Robert, on the other hand, looked tired, his face marked by worry. It wasn't the first time they had arrived unannounced, but the coldness with which they did always left a wound in Gabriel. "Hello, Gabriel," Anna replied without meeting his eyes, using the distant formality she had adopted over the years. "We came to see Mom. Where is she?" "She's resting," Gabriel replied, trying to hide his discomfort. The tension in the air was palpable, but before he could add anything more, Robert intervened. "How is she? The doctor already said how much time she has left, right?" he asked, without a trace of softness in his voice. The direct, almost insensitive question hit Gabriel like a punch. It was as if his mother's illness was just another matter to resolve. Gabriel felt the knot in his stomach tighten further. He had spent countless nights caring for Olivia, watching her body weaken while Anna and Robert lived their lives far away, barely worrying about her. And now, suddenly, here they were, unannounced, as if they had just remembered that their mother still existed. But it wasn't just concern that had brought them here. He knew that. There was something more, something about to be revealed. Anna walked into the living room, her heels echoing on the wooden floor. She paused for a moment to survey the place, almost as if taking note of every corner. "This place needs urgent renovations," she muttered disdainfully, loud enough for Gabriel and Robert to hear. "I suppose when Mom is no longer here, we'll have to fix it." Gabriel frowned, taken aback by the coldness in her words. Was that what mattered to them now? The house, the property. While their mother struggled for every breath, they were already thinking about what would remain when she was gone. "Anna," Gabriel started, trying to contain his anger. "Mom is still here. She's still alive." Anna looked at him for the first time since arriving, her eyes cold and calculating. "Yes, I know, Gabriel," she replied, her tone as sharp as her gaze. "But we all know what's going to happen, and someone has to think about what comes next." Robert, restless and visibly nervous, moved closer to his sister, attempting to ease the situation, albeit without much success. "What Anna means is that, well, we need to talk about the inheritance. We know Mom doesn't have much, but the house is the only thing of value." His words were clumsy, and Gabriel could see the sweat on his forehead. The inheritance. There it was. Gabriel had known that was the true reason behind their visit, but hearing it aloud made him furious. They hadn't come to see how their mother was doing. They hadn't come to spend time with her in her final days. They had come because they wanted to know what they would get when she was no longer around. The greed, which had been creeping in slowly, was now glaringly obvious. Gabriel clenched his fists, struggling to remain calm. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mother, who had given them everything she had, was dying in the next room, and all they could think about were material possessions. "I can't believe this is what you care about now," he finally said, his voice filled with disappointment. "Mom is about to die, and you're already talking about what's going to happen to the house." Anna looked at him coldly, as if she didn't understand why he was surprised. "Gabriel, it's nothing personal. We're just being realistic." Anna crossed her arms, with not a hint of remorse on her face. "We all knew this moment was coming. Mom isn't going to be here forever, and we need to prepare." Robert nodded weakly, though his discomfort was evident. Clearly, he didn't want to be in the middle of the conflict, but he wasn't going to contradict Anna either. Gabriel felt his anger consuming him, but before he could respond, they heard a soft voice from the hallway door. "Why don't you come and ask me directly?" The three turned to see Mrs. Olivia standing at the entrance of the hallway. She leaned against the doorframe, her body weak and trembling, but her eyes shone with determination. Gabriel rushed to help her, but Olivia raised her hand, indicating that she didn't need it. She wanted to do this alone. Anna and Robert stood frozen, surprised to see their mother on her feet. They hadn't expected her to confront them, not like this. "Mom, no." "We didn't want to upset you," Robert said, trying to smooth things over. Olivia looked at both of them, her expression serious and tired. "Oh, of course you did," she replied in a soft but firm voice. "You wanted to talk about my inheritance, about what's going to happen when I'm no longer here." She paused, her gaze penetrating each of them. "But you know what? I'm still here." Silence took over the room as Olivia slowly walked to an armchair and sat down with the dignity of a queen who had decided it was time to confront the issues of her kingdom. "Mom, that wasn't our intention," Anna began, but Olivia interrupted her with a gesture. "Anna, Robert, I've given my life for you. I gave you everything I had. And now that I have little time left, I see that the only thing you care about is what I'll leave behind." Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, her voice trembling with exhaustion and pain. "It breaks my heart to see what you have become." Anna and Robert remained silent, unable to respond. Gabriel, standing beside his mother, felt caught between anger and sadness. He didn't know if it was his place to say anything, but in that moment, Olivia turned her gaze to him. "Gabriel," she said softly, taking his hand, "you have been here with me, always. You never abandoned me." Anna frowned, visibly uncomfortable. She didn't like the direction the conversation was taking. "Mom, he's not," she began, but Olivia interrupted her again. "He's not my blood son, is he?" Olivia asked, looking directly at Anna. "That's what you've always thought. But let me tell you something. Gabriel is more my son than the two of you. Because while you left me alone, he took care of me. He was here when I needed him most. And now—" Olivia paused, taking a deep breath. She knew that what she was about to say would cause more conflict, but she could no longer hold it back. "Now, everything I have, I leave to him." The silence that followed was absolute. Anna and Robert were stunned, unable to process what they had just heard. Gabriel, for his part, was equally shocked. He hadn't expected his mother to make such a drastic decision, much less reveal it in that manner. "What?" Anna was the first to speak, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Mum, what are you saying?" "What you heard, Anna." Olivia's voice was firm, even though her body remained weakened. "The house, my belongings. Everything will go to Gabriel. He has earned it, not for being my blood son or not, but for being the only one who was with me when I needed it most." Robert, who had remained silent until then, finally exploded. "You can't do that, Mom. It's not fair," he shouted, his eyes filled with rage. "We are your children." Olivia looked at him sadly. "I know, Robert, and that's why it hurts me more than you can imagine. But this is my decision, and it's not something I'm going to regret." Gabriel, not knowing what to say, squeezed his mother's hand tightly. He felt a mix of gratitude and guilt. He had never asked for anything, and now everything would be given to him. He knew that this decision would unleash a whirlwind between him and his siblings. The tension in the room was suffocating, and as the sun continued to peek through the windows, the reality of what had just occurred became increasingly evident. The battle for the inheritance and for their mother's love had just begun. The silence following Olivia's revelation was thick, almost palpable. No one dared to break it, but the looks exchanged between Anna and Robert were filled with disbelief and suppressed anger. Gabriel, for his part, remained motionless, as if the world around him had come to a halt. His mother's decision to leave everything to him felt like a heavy stone dropped into the family's heart. He knew that, even though he hadn't asked for anything, it would only worsen the already fragile relationship with his siblings. Olivia struggled to breathe, exhausted by the intensity of the conversation. She knew she had dropped a bomb in the heart of her family, but she also knew there was no turning back. For years, she had tried to be fair to all her children, giving more than she had to keep them united. But now, on her deathbed, fairness looked different. It was not just about material possessions. It was about acknowledging sacrifice, love, and loyalty. "Mom." Anna's voice, usually cold and calculated, trembled in a way that hadn't been heard in years. "You can't do this. You can't leave everything to him. We are your children, your family, Robert and I. We have also been part of this house, part of your life." Robert, still sitting on the couch, hands on his head, murmured, "It can't be. This isn't fair." Olivia looked at her two biological children, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resolution. "What isn't fair," Olivia said, her voice barely a whisper but laden with firmness, "is that you, who grew up here, who received all my love and dedication, left me alone when I needed you most. What isn't fair is that while I am dying, you only think about the house, about what I will leave behind when I die." She took a breath, with effort. "But Gabriel, he has been here, always, without asking for anything in return." Gabriel, who hadn't spoken a word until then, slowly rose, his face filled with conflict. He didn't want to make things worse, but he also couldn't ignore the truth his mother had just exposed. "Mom, you don't have to do this for me," he said softly, looking at Olivia. "I've never wanted anything from you but your love. I don't need the house or what's left. I don't want this to destroy what little remains of this family." Olivia smiled weakly. Though her body was exhausted, the affection she felt for Gabriel shone in her eyes. "I know, son, and precisely for that reason, you are the one who deserves it the most. It's not the material value that matters. It's the fact that you have been the only one who stayed, who has been with me in the hardest moments. I'm not rewarding you with a house. I'm thanking you for the love you've given me when I needed it most." Olivia's words left everyone in silence again, but this time it was a silence filled with raw emotions. Anna was visibly affected, her face reflecting an internal struggle between resentment and guilt. Robert, on the other hand, remained caught up in his own conflict, trapped between the weight of his financial problems and the bitter reality that he hadn't been there for their mother. Olivia took a deep breath, knowing she had to finish what she had started. She had spent the last week writing letters for each of her children, letters filled with confessions, pain, and an attempt to heal the wounds that existed in her family. She knew that once she was gone, what would remain were those words, her emotional legacy. "I have something else I want to tell you all," Olivia announced with effort, shifting slightly in bed. Anna and Robert moved a little closer, though they still kept an emotional distance. Gabriel, on the other hand, sat beside her, ready to hear what his mother had to say. "I've written letters for each of you," Olivia continued. "In them, I explain my reasons, and I also talk about things I never had the courage to say in life." Robert looked up, confused. "Letters?" Olivia nodded. "Yes, letters you will receive after I'm gone. In them, I talk about my love for you, my regrets, but also the truth. Because I want you to understand that when I'm no longer here, it wasn't the money, the house, or the inheritance that mattered to me. What I wanted most was to see you united and to see that despite everything, you found peace among yourselves." Gabriel looked at his mother with tears in his eyes, understanding what those letters represented. He knew his mother was trying to leave everything in order, to mend the open wounds before her departure. Anna, though visibly affected, couldn't shake the feeling that all of this was too much. She stood up from her chair, unable to remain in the same room any longer. "I don't know if I can keep listening to this," she said, walking toward the door. "This isn't fair to us. But apparently you've already made your decision, Mum." Olivia watched her, feeling the pain in every word from her eldest daughter. "Anna," she called, her voice softer. "You're right, it's not fair. None of this is. But life hasn't been fair to me either. I gave everything for you, and I never meant to hurt you. I just want that when all of this is over, you find a way to forgive me, and to forgive yourself." Anna didn't respond. She stood with her back to her mother for a few seconds, breathing deeply, before exiting through the door without looking back. The sound of the door closing echoed in the house, leaving a resonance that seemed to reflect the emotional tension lingering in every corner. Robert remained in his place, not daring to move, as if everything he had heard had left him paralyzed. "Robert," Olivia continued, her voice almost fading, "I know this is difficult for you too. I've seen the weight you carry, and I regret that life hasn't been easy for you. But I ask you, son, not to let resentment consume you. Money, the house, none of that can fill the void I feel in my heart for not having been closer to you." Olivia's words seemed to break something in Robert. The man, who had always tried to maintain a facade of strength, finally crumbled. He brought his hands to his face and began to sob silently, unable to contain the pain that had accumulated over years of failures and resentments. Gabriel, without saying a word, moved closer to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Although the years of emotional distance had created a chasm between them, in that moment, Gabriel did not see him as a rival, but as his brother. The same brother who had been lost, just like him, in a life full of unfulfilled expectations. Olivia watched them both, tears in her eyes. She knew her words couldn't fix everything, but at least she had planted a seed of hope. "I don't want this family to end up broken," Olivia said, with her last breath of strength. "When I'm gone, all I want is for you three to find a way to be together. That will be enough for me." Robert, through tears, nodded, while Gabriel squeezed his brother's shoulder, offering silent support. Night fell, bringing with it an air of tense calm. Olivia returned to her bed, exhausted from the conversation, but at peace with the decision she had made. The letters, kept in her drawer, would be delivered to her children after her passing. In them lay Olivia's last hope, that despite the pain, resentment, and difficulties, her children could heal the wounds she hadn't been able to mend in her life. That night, Gabriel stayed by his mother's side once again. He knew the end was near, but he also knew that, for the first time in a long while, his mother had freed herself from the weight of secrets and difficult decisions. As Olivia closed her eyes, a faint smile crossed her face. She had done what she could, and now the rest was in the hands of her children. The day of Mrs. Olivia's funeral dawned grey, as if the sky itself felt the weight of the sadness enveloping the family. The house, which had been the backdrop for so many happy and painful moments, was now filled with an unfathomable emptiness. Gabriel, who had spent every one of the last days by his mother's side, could hardly believe that she was gone. Her absence felt like a deep crack that he didn't know if it would ever heal. Flowers covered the coffin, and the lit candles in every corner of the small church seemed to try to provide a warmth they ultimately couldn't deliver. Gabriel stood beside his mother's coffin with reddened eyes, unable to look away from that final symbol of Olivia's life. Around him, voices whispered empty condolences as the funeral ceremony progressed at a slow and inevitable pace. No more than a few minutes had passed since Gabriel arrived at the church when he heard the familiar voices of Anna and Robert entering the space. Both arrived separately, but the tension between them and Gabriel was palpable. The absence of Luis, their younger brother living abroad, felt like an additional void in an already emotionally charged event. Luis had only sent a hurried message, apologizing for not being able to attend. Anna, always impeccable and composed, wore an elegant black suit that seemed more fitting for a business meeting than her mother's funeral. Her face, though controlled, displayed the same coldness she had carried for years. However, Gabriel could see the slight tension in her jaw and how her hands, though steady, trembled slightly. Robert, on the other hand, looked defeated. His expression was marked by fatigue and hopelessness. The passage of time and financial problems had consumed him more than he was willing to admit. Unlike Anna, he didn't try to hide his discomfort in this setting. Each step he took seemed heavy, as if he didn't quite know how to act amidst so much pain and resentment. The ceremony continued as the priest's words filled the church. But Gabriel could barely focus on what was being said. He could only think about his mother's decision, the letters she had left for each of them, and the inheritance that now hung over their heads like a shadow that would soon be unleashed. The weight of the inheritance and Olivia's decisions hung in the air, although no one mentioned it directly. However, the looks exchanged between Anna and Robert said it all. Despite being there to say goodbye to their mother, their minds seemed to be elsewhere, anticipating what would come after the funeral. When the ceremony ended and attendees began to approach Gabriel to offer their condolences, Anna stood aside, observing from a distance. It was clear she didn't want to be there longer than necessary. Robert, though also avoiding much conversation, briefly approached Gabriel. "I'm really sorry, Gabriel," Robert said quietly, looking at the ground. "I know you were there for her until the end." Gabriel nodded, appreciating the gesture, but feeling that Robert's words carried a sense of remorse. He knew his brother felt guilty for not being more present, but that small acknowledgement didn't seem enough to ease the tension between them. Anna, on the other hand, made no effort to come closer. She simply stood there, staring at their mother's coffin with a mixture of nostalgia and detachment. It wasn't the first time she had acted this way, but now, at such a crucial moment, her coldness was almost unbearable for Gabriel. After the funeral, as attendees slowly dispersed, the family lawyer, an older man with glasses that seemed heavier than his own face, approached the three siblings. "I'd like to talk to you about the matters of the will," the lawyer said, with the formality of someone who had had to deliver such news many times before. "It's important that we discuss it as soon as possible." Gabriel's heart raced. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't prepared for what would follow. Anna, for her part, nodded briefly, showing her immediate willingness to address the topic. "I suppose we can meet later," Anna said curtly. "I think it's time we resolve this once and for all." Robert nodded, though his expression revealed nervousness. He knew a lot was at stake, especially with his financial issues, and Olivia's decision to leave everything to Gabriel had left him bewildered and resentful. However, it was Gabriel who spoke first, his voice trembling but firm. "Before we discuss what Mom left," Gabriel began, looking at his siblings, "I think we should read the letters she wrote to us. Mom left one for each of us, explaining her decisions. It's not just about the inheritance. It's about what she wanted for us as a family." Anna frowned. Clearly she had no patience for more emotional explanations, but she said nothing. Robert, on the other hand, nodded slowly, aware that the letters might clarify some of the confusion he felt. "All right, Gabriel," Robert finally said, his voice somewhat softer. "Let's read the letters first." After a long silence, the three siblings headed to the family home, the house that was now the center of all conflict. Gabriel felt a pressure in his chest as they climbed the porch steps and entered the home that now felt so empty without their mother's presence. In the living room, Gabriel took out the 3 letters Olivia had left behind. Each one had the name of its recipient written in his mother's delicate handwriting. Gabriel's hands trembled as he handed them to their respective owners. He knew that these letters contained not only Olivia's last words, but also an emotional truth that could forever change the course of their relationships. Anna was the first to take her letter, but did not open it immediately. She held it in her hands, as if deciding whether she wanted to know what her mother had to say. Robert, for his part, stared at his letter with eyes filled with fear and regret. Gabriel took his, recalling the night his mother had confessed the truth about his origins. He knew the words they would read in those letters were meant to heal, but they also had the potential to reopen old wounds. The silence in the room was overwhelming. The letters were in their hands, and what came next would define not only the future of the inheritance, but also the fate of the family. Finally, Anna broke the seal of her letter and began to read. Her eyes moved quickly, her face showing emotions Gabriel couldn't fully decipher. Gradually, the hardness in her expression began to crumble. Remorse overtook her features, and for the first time in years, a tear rolled down her cheek. Seeing Anna's reaction, Robert opened his letter as well. As he read their mother's words, his body trembled slightly. It was as if each sentence struck him with the weight of the years he had spent battling himself, his failures, and his lack of connection with their mother. When he finished, he let the letter fall into his lap, his gaze lost at some point on the floor. Gabriel, still without opening his letter, observed his siblings. He knew that within those pages were truths they had denied for years. He understood that their mother's words sought reconciliation, but also laid bare the pain she herself had endured. With his heart racing, Gabriel opened his letter and began to read. Olivia's words were those he had already heard in her confession, but reading them now, written by her hand, gave them a new weight. His mother thanked him for being the only one who had never abandoned her, for loving her unconditionally. But also, in those lines, she asked him to try to keep the family united, even though she knew it would be difficult. The letters, while they could not resolve everything, made it clear that what mattered most to Olivia was not material possessions, but the peace she sought for her children. With tears filling his eyes, Gabriel carefully folded his letter. The silence that followed was different from before. This time, it was a silence charged with repressed emotions that were beginning to surface. Anna and Robert looked at each other for the first time in years, their eyes reflecting more than just resentment. Gabriel knew there was still much to resolve, but this was the first step. Mrs. Olivia's funeral, filled with silences and unexpressed emotions, had left a mark on all of them. The letters were just the beginning of what would come next. The material inheritance still loomed over them, but what was truly at stake was whether they could find a way to reconciliation, or if resentment would consume them entirely. The sun had set hours ago, and darkness enveloped the family home like a heavy blanket. Gabriel, Anna, and Robert sat in the living room, their mother's letters still in their hands. The dim light from a lamp in the corner barely illuminated their faces, but the tension was evident. No one had spoken since they read Mrs. Olivia's final words, and the silence that had settled seemed unbreakable. Finally, it was Anna who broke the silence, her voice sounding more fragile than usual, a vulnerability she rarely displayed. "I can't believe Mom left us these words," she murmured, looking at the paper she held. "I can't understand how we got here." Her voice, though soft, was filled with internal conflict. Her mother's words had touched something deep within her, something she had suppressed for far too long. However, beneath that layer of vulnerability, Gabriel could sense that the issue of the inheritance remained an unresolved battlefield. "Mom was trying to explain herself," Gabriel replied, his voice more controlled than he felt. "She left us these letters so we could understand what she felt and what she wanted for us." Anna clenched her jaw, struggling with her own emotions. She was not willing to admit that her mother was right to distance herself from them, nor that Gabriel, the adopted son, or so she had believed, had been the only one present. "Understanding how she felt doesn't change anything, Gabriel," Anna finally said, lifting her gaze to him, her tone colder than he expected. "The inheritance is the inheritance. You can't expect us to just accept that it all goes to you. We are her blood children. Robert and I also have rights. There it was. Gabriel had known since the funeral that this moment would come. He understood that despite their mother's words in the letters, the conflict over the inheritance would not disappear so easily. Anna and Robert would never see him as a true son, no matter how much time he had spent with their mother or how many sacrifices he had made. But what Anna didn't yet know was the truth that Olivia had confessed to Gabriel in her final days, a truth that would change everything. Robert, who had remained silent since reading his letter, raised his head, his dark eyes filled with confusion and anxiety. "Gabriel, it's not that we don't appreciate what you did for Mom," Robert began, his voice trembling slightly. "We know you were there for her, but she's our mother. I don't know how we're supposed to accept being left with nothing." Gabriel felt a pang of compassion for Robert. Unlike Anna, Robert wasn't speaking from a place of arrogance, but from desperation. His financial problems had consumed him, and Gabriel knew that deep down, his brother was grappling with the guilt of having been absent during the last years of Olivia's life. Gabriel took a deep breath, preparing for what he knew he had to do. He hadn't wanted to reach this point, but keeping the truth hidden would only prolong everyone's suffering. "There's something else you need to know," he finally said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "Before Mom died, she told me something that changes everything." Anna and Robert looked at him skeptically, but Gabriel knew that once the truth was revealed, the family dynamics would change forever. "I'm not the adopted son you always thought I was," Gabriel continued, his words carrying weight. "I am Mom's biological son." The silence that followed was absolute. Anna frowned, unable to process what she had just heard. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone almost incredulous. "Mom adopted you. She always told us that. We all knew it. Why are you saying this now?" Gabriel shook his head, recalling the night when Olivia, in tears, had confessed the truth to him. "It wasn't like that. Mom had me when she was very young. It was a complicated relationship, with a married man. She decided to hide it to protect us both, to protect her reputation and that of the family. That's why she raised me as if I were adopted, so no one would ever suspect the truth." Robert brought his hands to his head, his face full of confusion. "This doesn't make sense," Robert murmured. "Why didn't Mom ever tell us? Why keep this secret all these years?" Gabriel looked at his brother, knowing it was hard to accept. He had taken time to process it himself. "Because she wanted to protect me," Gabriel replied, feeling the words come out with difficulty. "She didn't want me to grow up with the stigma of being an illegitimate child, nor did she want you to feel betrayed. It was her way of keeping us safe, but she knew she couldn't take that secret to the grave." Anna, always the most composed, seemed on the verge of losing her calm. Her eyes filled with anger as she tried to digest what Gabriel was saying. "So now you're telling us that you're the biological son?" Anna shot back, her tone laced with resentment. "And what are we supposed to do with this information? Just accept that this has always been a lie?" Gabriel met her gaze directly, refusing to look away. "I'm not asking you to accept anything, Anna. I'm just telling you the truth, just as Mom told me. I know it's hard to understand, but now that you know, you can see why she decided to leave me the house. It wasn't just because I was here. It was because I am her son, just as much as you are." Anna's face hardened. Despite the truth Gabriel had just revealed, she couldn't shake the feeling that all of this was a betrayal. A part of her, the most vulnerable and human part, was filled with jealousy. Her mother, the woman she had admired and distanced herself from, had hidden such a monumental secret. But that same part of her wasn't ready to accept that Gabriel, someone she had always seen as the adopted one, was now the true biological son. Robert, on the other hand, looked more defeated than angry. It wasn't just the inheritance that concerned him, but the realization that his entire life had been based on a lie. Gabriel's confession left him speechless, and his face reflected the deep internal confusion that was consuming him. "What do we do now?" Robert finally asked, his voice subdued. "If Gabriel is the biological son, does that change anything? Does it really change what Mom decided?" Anna crossed her arms, clearly still reluctant to accept the new reality. "What changes," she said, "is that Gabriel has been lying to us all this time. If it's true that Mom told him this before she died, why didn't he mention it earlier? Why wait until now?" Gabriel gritted his teeth, feeling anger rise within him. "It wasn't easy to process, Anna," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I've barely had time to understand it myself, and I didn't want this to be another reason to divide us. But I can't keep it hidden any longer. This is the truth, and while it hurts, we need to accept it." Silence fell again in the room. The truth had been exposed, but instead of resolving conflicts, it seemed to have opened a new wound. Gabriel knew that even though he had been honest, his siblings wouldn't easily accept what he had said. "I think it's best if we take some time to digest this," Gabriel finally said, trying to calm the waters. "We can't resolve everything in one night. There are too many emotions, too many open wounds." Anna nodded, though with evident reluctance. She stood up from the armchair, taking her coat, and headed toward the door. "This isn't over," she said coldly. "I'm not going to sit idly by while all of this crumbles. There will be consequences, Gabriel. Make no mistake about that." Without saying more, Anna left the house, leaving a trail of tension in her wake. Robert followed slowly, his mind still wrapped in confusion. Before leaving, he looked at Gabriel one last time. "I want to believe that Mom did this for the good of everyone," he said softly. "But I don't know if I can forgive all of this. I don't know if we can remain a family after this." And with those final words, Robert left, leaving Gabriel alone in the house, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the weight of the truth he had revealed. The battle for the truth had begun, but the outcome was still far from reach. The sound of the wind hitting the windows of the family home echoed in the room, as if nature itself were witnessing the conflict unfolding within. Gabriel, now alone after Anna and Robert's departure, felt the weight of what he had revealed. He knew that the truth about his origins, painful as it was, wasn't the only thing left to discover. There was something more, something Olivia had left for them in the letters that had yet to be fully read. Hours later, Anna and Robert returned, both with expressions laden with unresolved tensions. Despite the palpable resentment, there was determination in their eyes. The time had come to confront the truth in its entirety. They knew Olivia had left them a final piece of the puzzle, the letter that Luis was to receive, which had remained unopened. Gabriel looked at them, and without needing to speak, they understood they would do this together. He took out Luis's letter, the one Olivia had written for her most distant son, the one who hadn't even been present to say goodbye. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and began to read aloud. The first words of the letter were simple, but filled with a love Olivia had never stopped feeling, despite the distance. He had been her adventurous son, the one who had left in search of dreams, but also the one who, in the process, had become lost to his mother. However, what no one expected lay in the final lines. "Luis, you were never my biological son," Gabriel read, feeling the air in the room grow denser. "You were the result of a mistake at the hospital, one I never had the courage to correct. Raising you was one of the greatest gifts of my life, but the truth is that we do not share the same blood." The impact of those words fell like a lightning bolt upon Anna and Robert. Luis, the youngest brother, whom they had always considered the most legitimate, was not. The true irony unfolded before them. Gabriel, whom they had always believed to be adopted, was the biological son, while Luis, the most distant, did not share their blood. Anna let out a bitter laugh. "So all this time, we were living a lie," she said, her voice trembling between disbelief and resentment. "Luis, the one we always thought was blood, isn't even our brother." Robert, who had remained silent, simply sank into the armchair, stunned by the revelation. Gabriel, for his part, slowly closed the letter, feeling the weight of his mother's words still resonating in his heart. "Mum wanted us to know the truth before it was too late," Gabriel said softly. "She didn't do it to hurt us, but so that we could understand that blood doesn't define who we are as a family." The silence that followed was long, but different from the previous one. It was a silence filled with reflection, as if the three finally understood that the bonds that united them had always been more complex than they had imagined. The truth had hurt them, but it also offered them a chance to start anew. For the first time in years, Gabriel saw something in Anna and Robert's eyes that went beyond resentment, a spark of acceptance, or at least the acknowledgement that the family they had always thought they knew was much more than the secrets they had kept. The revelation about Luis had left Anna and Robert in silence, while Gabriel, sitting in the same room where so many difficult moments had unfolded, watched as his siblings processed the truth. The family they thought they knew had crumbled in a matter of days, and what remained now was uncertain ground, filled with emotions that even they didn't know how to handle. Anna, who had always been the strongest and most calculating, was the first to speak. Her words, though soft, carried a mix of pain and resignation. "I can't keep hating. Neither Mom nor you, Gabriel," she said, looking at her adoptive brother, though now she saw him in a new light. "What has happened? All of this. I can't change it, but I don't want to keep holding on to that resentment." Gabriel observed her, noticing the emotional exhaustion in her gaze. Despite her earlier coldness, Anna was finally showing a crack in her armor. Although the wounds between them wouldn't heal overnight, her words were a small step toward reconciliation. Robert, who had remained silent, lifted his head, his face reflecting a mix of shame and relief. He leaned forward, nervously rubbing his hands together. "I never knew how to handle all of this, the pressure, the failures, and now, this secret. But I think, if Mom could forgive us and see beyond it all, then maybe I can try too," he murmured, looking at Gabriel with newfound understanding. Gabriel felt a lump in his throat. He knew this moment of vulnerability was crucial. He had always dreamed of the possibility of a united family, even amid the chaos surrounding them now. Despite all the pain, there was still a chance to rebuild what remained of them. "It's not about what Mom left or who shares her blood," Gabriel said, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "What matters is that, in the end, we are siblings. All Mom wanted was for us to find a way to be together, to leave the past behind and start anew." Anna nodded slowly, her gaze now softer. "You're right, Gabriel. All of this, the money, the house, none of that is so important. What matters is what we do now, and I can't lose what's left of this family." Robert joined in Anna's nod, revealing a fragility he had not wanted to admit until that moment. In that instant, Gabriel made a decision. Even though his mother had left him everything, he knew that what she valued most was family peace. This was his chance to honor her legacy. "I'm going to share the inheritance with you both," he said, looking at his siblings. "I don't want anything to drive us further apart. Mom left me everything because she trusted me to take care of what remains, but I believe the best thing I can do is ensure that whatever little or much there is keeps us united." Anna and Robert looked at him, clearly surprised by his generosity. Gabriel knew that this gesture wouldn't erase the pain or the accumulated tensions, but it was a beginning. In his siblings' eyes, he saw a glimmer of something he hadn't seen in years: respect and perhaps hope. The road to redemption would be long, but at that moment, Gabriel knew he had taken the first step toward fulfilling his mother's deepest wish: to heal the wounds of a broken family. Weeks passed since the conversation in the family home. The tensions that had marked Gabriel, Anna, and Robert's relationship began to fade little by little. The wounds still existed, but the resentment that once fueled them was giving way to something different: understanding and ultimately forgiveness. Olivia's house, which had been the center of so many conflicts, now felt lighter, less burdened by the shadow of secrets. Gabriel had kept his promise. The inheritance was shared equally among the three siblings. Although for Gabriel, what mattered most was not the money or the possessions, but that the family, in its broken yet repaired essence, was showing signs of rebirth. One spring day, the three siblings gathered in the family home, not to discuss the past, but to celebrate a small reunion. Gabriel had prepared a simple meal, and the table, once a witness to so many uncomfortable silences, was now filled with soft laughter and kind conversations. Anna, with a more relaxed face than she had worn in a long time, raised her glass in a toast. "To Mom," she said, with a smile that, though tinged with nostalgia, showed gratitude, for her strength, her love, and for giving us the chance to be a family again. Robert, sitting next to her, nodded. The worry that used to mark his expression had diminished. For the first time in years, he seemed at peace with himself and with others. "To her," Robert added, looking at Gabriel with a silent gratitude that didn't need words. Gabriel raised his glass as well, feeling a profound calm in his heart. He knew that his mother had wanted this more than anything, that even after her death, her children would find their way back to each other. It hadn't been easy, but he felt he had honored her last wish. After the toast, the three siblings remained seated at the table, enjoying the moment, recalling anecdotes from the past, both good and bad, but always with the certainty that, despite everything they had been through, there was still hope for them as a family. As the afternoon began to fade and the sun slowly slipped toward the horizon, Gabriel stepped out onto the porch and looked at the garden where he had played so many times as a child. In that place, surrounded by memories and his mother, he felt a peace he had never experienced before. He knew that although the path to reconciliation was not yet complete, they had taken the first steps toward something new. Olivia's true legacy was not in the house or the money. It lay in the lesson she had left behind, the importance of family, not just for the blood that unites them, but for the bonds forged through love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Gabriel closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you, Mum. We did it." And that concludes this story. I hope you enjoyed this journey filled with emotions, secrets, and redemption. Sometimes, family is not defined solely by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and loyalty. If this story touched your heart as much as it did mine, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss more content like this. Remember, we can always learn from the stories of others, and at the end of the day, what matters most is finding forgiveness and peace with those we love. See you in the next video, where we will continue sharing more stories that inspire, move, and make us reflect. Until next time.